Well, hi, Mike. It's great to connect with you today. Thank you so much for being willing to have a conversation. I'm sorry I can't be down in Brattleboro, Windham County visiting you in person, but really wanted to have a moment to hear how you're doing, how remote legislating's going. I know you guys have a lot on your plate. I think you're on GovOps this year. Can't even imagine what that's been like, but tell me about yourself. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We're all healthy here. The family's healthy, so we're grateful for that, and we're grateful for a lot of the basic things here. The COVID situation has certainly amplified the level of gratitude and all that we have to be grateful for. So, and you're doing well?
Yeah, hanging in there. It's definitely a different time to be campaigning, but honestly, it feels really good to be able to shift all energy and resources to providing information and trying to just support you all in the legislature, the administration, and some of our towns and municipalities. And yep, my folks are doing well. The farm's up and running, and yeah, taking each day as it comes.
Yeah. Things are in the garden coming up already?
Yeah. Well, you know, we have that snow that came over the last couple of days, so it's been a little bit of a stop and go, but they've got a few greenhouses which help, and they're getting the tomatoes in and getting as much planted as possible. So it's been great. But so tell me what's going on. I mean, so you're remote legislating, everything via Zoom, I suspect.
It's a transition to get used to that. You know, one of the good things about the working at the State House is there's a wonderful sense of this being a beehive where things come together and all sorts of cross-pollination happens, and we lose that a little bit. It's good to have this. You know, the health and safety of Vermonters is our paramount concern right now, and this is our part that we can do in it. House Government Operations has been pretty busy. We're trying to figure out how best we can help municipal governments, and a few of the things we've been doing is to try and look at how we're going to do elections. We have a primary election that's coming up in August. We have a general election that's coming up in November, and before then, there are a lot of school districts that have not yet had their school budgets voted on. So that holds up that. It also holds up town budgets, because town budgets can't set their rates until the school budget. So it's a real domino effect that we're trying to help move things along. One of the biggest challenges right now is trying to get on the same page as the governor on mail-in voting. Mail-in voting is not a new phenomenon. If you've been in the military, if you've lived overseas, we've depended on mail-in voting for a long time. More and more Vermonters are doing it, and states have moved to this. Oregon, Washington, other states have done mail-in voting almost exclusively for years now. And the idea that keeps coming up that somehow this is creating a fertile ground for fraud does not match up with the facts. And
it really doesn't. It really doesn't. And I love the idea of every Vermonter walking out to the mailbox in, you know, let's say end of June, and they get an envelope and they open it up and it's got 3 ballots on it. You know, if we're talking about the primary, you can bring the ballots inside, you know, bring them to the kitchen table. You have time to think about what's happening here in Vermont, you know, the response to COVID-19. You think about who's on the ballot, you get to do research. It creates a lot more accessibility and participation, I think, for our elections at a time when we need more Vermonters, especially Vermonters who might be a little bit older or immune compromised. We just don't want anyone feeling like they've got to go to the polls or having to go through extra steps to be able to participate in an election. I couldn't agree more. And I think it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, we called on elected officials and candidates to join us, and let's move to vote by mail here in Vermont. So I'm afraid it might be a little late, but hopefully that we can keep that conversation going and shoot for it for the general.
And there's also other options. We've allowed for the Secretary of State to authorize drive-through voting, where you can drive up, get a ballot, and drive up to the next window and and put your ballot in, or drive-by voting where you get your ballot, you don't even have to go in. They'll have secure boxes. The idea that our town clerks can't keep votes secure, I think, is really demeaning to our town clerks. And you know, you're working in the law, I think you may have a better handle on whether there's fraud that goes on in elections, but I haven't seen evidence that there is.
I have every confidence that our town clerks who have been managing elections and town meetings and voting is what we do. Direct democracy is what we do in Vermont. That's what we do really well.
Yeah.
So I hear you. But I wanted to talk a little bit about some of your health and human services work. Last week, I was talking with a lot of teachers on the occasion of Teacher Appreciation Week, and a lot of questions came up just about our children, how children are doing during COVID-19, their needs, just a lot of the trauma that children and families are experiencing right now. And I guess you don't have to reflect on that, but one reason I did want to connect with you was just to learn a little bit more about what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what challenges are coming up generally around children, families, health and human services, and the response in the legislature.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned teachers, because what we've been seeing happening here and probably around the rest of Vermont is these wonderful parades they've been organizing in towns where the teachers will get a caravan of cars, will get the fire engines leading them, and they drive through the towns to see where their students are so they can wave and say hello. And it's one of those Vermont things that really is a reminder of what's special about living here in Vermont. I think that there's going to be some children that struggle. If kids are not living in a resilient, nurturing home with protective factors, they're going to have trouble, but probability is they've had trouble before this. So this may amplify those concerns. I think for a lot of the kids, they'll do fine. What we do know, going back to 1995 with the first study on adverse childhood experiences that the CDC and Kaiser did, children need nurturing adults in their lives. And unfortunately, we have a lot of children who struggle because these are generational phenomenon. Trauma is something we're starting to come to terms with understanding. And the challenge is that we haven't yet made the full investments that we need to support children who've experienced trauma. And when people get frustrated and see that there are families that have been in generational poverty for several generations now, we see trauma moves from one generation to the next. We see generational addiction, we see generational homelessness, generational incarceration. It's primarily because trauma has not been addressed. We can. There's lots more treatments that are coming online, and we're even looking at what's called post-traumatic growth, where we can turn traumatic events into growth opportunities. But people need support for that. Children need support, and that's where I really feel moving ahead, Vermont can continue to make focused investments in both our people and our infrastructure, so we can support children and help break those cycles of trauma, cycles of poverty, and bring more people to be productive in Vermont.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really appreciate the reflections and all the work that you've done. I know that you do a lot of work in addition to what you do in the legislature around these issues. I certainly know, having worked in the Attorney General's office, that we've done quite a bit here in Vermont around restorative justice and supporting our community justice centers. I think we are starting to have more and more conversations about prevention. And certainly as a prosecutor, by the time a case gets to my desk, you can see where the state could have stepped in and been more supportive, or where we've kind of failed in providing real prevention services. And I think there's a lot of lessons learned there. Over the last year and a half, I've been doing a lot of work on cases involving alleged child sexual abuse and talking about what that means for children later in life and trauma. So I think it's certainly an area where we can do more as a state, and I couldn't agree more, and would love to be a partner for you in the legislature, and really driving these issues forward, and coming up with a good plan for us here in Vermont. Do you have any?
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
our Attorney General has done some good work on this, and I think the idea is to keep people out of the pipeline, and not to make poverty a reason for people to get into that. But we still haven't made the investments. We don't have the staff. We don't have the supports. As you know, our dockets are clogged with cases that are more and more complex, and we need to make those investments. There's no way around this.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And while it's not entirely related, I have been talking a lot about broadband over the last couple of weeks. And as you know, I mean, it's the issue of the day, of the year, probably of the decade. But I think we now know very clearly, and perhaps more than ever, that equal access to the internet is equal access to education, to telemedicine, and also ensuring that children at home have access to services, all sorts of services that they might receive in the classroom. Yeah. So I think that's definitely an area where we could have a more coordinated approach and put a little more money as well. And when we think about prevention and our children.
And I believe it's also a place for government there. The providers that are out there have pretty much done what they're going to do. And the reason we don't have it to the last mile is that there's not a profit there. And I think the way forward is for us to create municipal utilities that are going to serve all the people there, and any profits will get put right back in. I know EC Fiber is something that's held up as a model for that, and we're trying to, in Windham County right now, we're trying to pull together something like that. We know there are issues of equity for people who can't have access, and this is one way we could address that. Businesses, education, we really need to make these investments.
We do. Windham County's own Senator Aiken, I think, talked about getting electricity to the end of the road, and I think it's about time we did the same with internet and treat it like a utility and support those communications utility districts that you mentioned, I think are popping up and are pretty successful around Vermont.
Yeah. So there is a real role for government here, and it can bring partners together that might not otherwise.
Yeah, and we don't have to do it alone. I think, as you said, there's room for partnerships. It's public-private. We've got a lot of smart people here in Vermont who are doing incredible work, and let's bring the best and brightest together and solve this problem once and for all.
And we're going to be these are the opportunities we're going to be having to face with right now because of the crisis. Whether it's local agriculture and more storage for communities to have more produce year round, to education, providing services like broadband. How do we provide medical services? I think within the crisis, there's going to be opportunities to make these changes. And I think what we need is leadership that's ready to step up and do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I couldn't be more excited to be running for lieutenant governor. And I think where we see our greatest challenges, we also see our greatest opportunities. And you put the nail on the head. And we now know it's all right here in front of our eyes what we need to do. I think it's just a matter of prioritizing, coming together, bringing the state together, really unifying our small communities, our rural communities, our counties, and having real partnerships with everyone, and it's I don't think we need more Montpelier, and I know I don't say that in an offensive way to our legislator, to you, and as someone who works in Montpelier, but to the extent we can get more Vermont in Montpelier and bring people together, I think that's our challenge and our call as we move forward. But is there anything else you'd like to talk about from what's happening in the legislature, or what you see as our greatest sort of challenges or opportunities? I mean, there's a lot happening in Windham County, I know, and in your community.
Yeah. One of the things is what the history here in Putney. This is a community that pulls together. And growing up on a farm, you know, you don't just do one thing, you have to do it all. And that's a great foundation for whatever else you want to do. So I appreciate that. Those are some of the sensibilities you bring to running for office. And I know that anybody that's had to shovel manure at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's a great leveling, but it's also a great way to center. And I know a friend of mine who grew up right down the road here, grew up on a small dairy farm, said his father always bought them a baseball glove, bought them basketball shoes, but they had to do chores first before they could get on to those other things. And it's important that we remember that's what Vermont's about. And we look to community and to the individuals that bring those individual skills and know how to work together with others. And one of the things I've been impressed with you as I've gotten to know you a little bit, there's that sense of growing up, knowing how to grow things and make things grow beyond just on the farm too. So here in Windham County, where it's a little different than it is up in Chittenden County, but we're still part of Vermont, and I'm looking forward to how we can work together in that way. So it's an interesting time right now. We have a crowded field, a talented field of candidates that are running for lieutenant governor. So I had to put together a process, and that process for me was trying to figure out who's ready to go and step in. The joke is that the first job of lieutenant governor is to see if the governor's breathing. And as we saw with Governor Dean, though, you have to be ready to step in. But who brings those values too? Those values of community, equality, justice, and who understands the economy of Vermont, starting with local agriculture and knowing that as much as we grow vegetables and produce milk and maple syrup, that microchips are our greatest export here in Vermont. So we have to be able to do that going forward, because the economy is going to be the linchpin to help things spring forward again and get. So as I've looked at all those questions, looked at the candidates, that's where your name came up in each of those questions, and I'm looking forward to working together with you, supporting your candidacy, and helping bring Vermont forward into some better times and out of this crisis, looking better than we did. So want to know what I can do, what others can do, and I'm wishing you all the luck and ready to support your candidacy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm incredibly grateful. And it's true. I think it's those deep Windham County roots, as you know, my grandmother and grandfather really cared a lot about education, cared a lot about the Putney School. And I know that our family relationship, our roots run deep. There's a lot of life skills and life experiences that I think we can't forget as we run for office and think about the work that we do every day. And it's sort of that roll up your sleeves, come together. I grew up on the farm where the saying was, many hands make light work. And you don't want to hear that when it's something you don't want to do, but ultimately it's true. And you all come together and you work hard and you get it done, and you feel a lot better after, and you feel a lot more hope in the ability of community and family and Vermonters to do good, to do well, to do a lot for each other in our state. So that's what I'm hopeful for and about, and I really look forward to working with you. I look forward to working with your colleagues, also with the Senate and with the governor, whomever he or she may be, and being a real voice for Southern Vermont, for our farmers, for our small business owners, for our educators, for those folks like yourself doing incredible and necessary work for our children and on health and human services. So what can you do? What others can do? This is a tough race, and we're 90 days or probably less out from the primary, which is on August 11th. And I'd say the most important thing is we need to get every Vermonter excited about government, excited about Vermont's recovery, excited about restarting Vermont. And that begins with getting involved in this election and getting to the polls and casting a ballot and then getting on board. So I think folks can visit mollyforvermont.com, sign up to volunteer, make a donation if you can, and then ultimately working with you and working with others to help us recover. So I can't thank you enough for your support.
You bet. Well, this is a time where we need good government more than ever, and we need good leadership. So wish you all the best and looking forward to a successful election.
Thank you. And I'll get down to Brattleboro and see you as soon as I can.
Great.